So this is a video on the very beginning of The Walking Dead and what it has to do with the Great Awakening. And I'm going to explain to you my opinion on what the zombies are. And at one point when Rick says they are the dead and Daryl says, no, we're not them, I'm going to explain to you what I believe that they meant by that. So this plays into Thomas Jefferson's comment when he wrote to, I believe it was John Madison in 1789, that the dead cannot own the earth. And by the end of this, I'm going to explain to you what that means. So we start out in The Walking Dead, Season 1, Episode 1, where we see Rick driving his vehicle down a road, and he gets out of the police car and he's looking for gas. So one of the first things he comes upon is a little girl walking by, and he crouches down and he looks under the vehicle. This is something that has to do with Alice in Wonderland, such as when Alice is looking through the keyhole or looking down the rabbit hole, or when in the Matrix, Neo cracks his door open to speak to someone and he sees a woman with a white rabbit tattoo. And here's the white rabbit, is the little zombie girl walking by with two house slippers that are both white rabbits. And over here to the left, you see a newspaper. So it's not like the people who made the show happened upon a bunch of cars at a gas station and there just happened to be a piece of trash laying on the ground that had this newspaper article on it. Everything about this show is specifically set up. So this paper here next to her shoe, she's walking towards the paper. She almost steps on it with her white rabbit slippers. And this paper is very important. So Mos Def is on the paper. Mos Def, I believe he's passed away now, but he was a rapper, and he had a certain status. He was something called El Bey the Moor, Moor. The Moors are people who have declared themselves to be, quote, sovereign citizens. They're in America, but they do not claim to be citizens of the United States. Now, some people, when they hear the phrase sovereign citizen, they get a strange little tweak up their spine and they get totally turned off and they run away. Now, in Alice in Wonderland, we see the worm hanging out on the mushrooms, and mushrooms play a big part in this also. And the worm asks Alice, "Who are you?" Because everything comes down to who you tell people you are. So Rick is in the hospital, and they're talking about how Dorothy closed her eyes and fell asleep. And I know Dorothy is the Wizard of Oz, but both of these fairy tales play in on this show. Alice in Wonderland more than Dorothy, but later on in the episodes and the seasons, we see when Judith is little and he and Michonne are together that Rick is reading a book to Judith, and the book is Wizard of Oz. And here they are. And here he's at the section where he's saying, as the house passed and nothing terrible had happened, she stopped, worrying, and resolved to wait calmly and see what the future would bring. At last she crawled over to the swaying floor and her bed and laid down upon it, and Toto laid down beside her in spite of the swaying of the house and the wailing of the wind. Dorothy soon closed her eyes and fell fast asleep. And the mushrooms and the keys that you see in Fear the Walking Dead, I'll talk about in another video. So back in Jefferson's time in 1789, he's writing a letter to Madison, and Jefferson at the time is in France. And he writes the letter and he says to Madison that the dead cannot own the earth. And what he means by that is that when you have a generation of people, and a generation at that time was 19 years, when you have a generation of people and they make laws and they build a society and they create a constitution and they contract with banks to get loans, and then they have to pay back the loans, that they can only do those things for themselves. So for 19 years. So when you're at the age of 19 and you're considered an adult, having entered, quote, the age of reason, end quote, that you're considered responsible and at the age of majority. And so you then are entitled to make a government, make laws, and contract debt for yourself. And that is because you are on the land and you are living and working on the land. So when you live and work on the land, you're the living. But when you become old and you cannot work on the land anymore, or when you die, the next generation has to take over. Well, the next generation are the living and they inherit the earth, they inherit the land. If they inherit your debt, then it is said that the earth then belongs to the dead, because debt is a legal thing and legal things are fictions, and legal things are fictions are not real. They're considered dead in the law. And so a bank, which is a corporation, and a corporation is a fiction, and it's called a fiction because it's something man-made and not something that was just found on the earth in nature. Those things are considered dead because they're not genuine, they're not true, they're not of nature, they're not of God. And so they don't live on the earth without man being here to create them. So those legal things are considered dead. So if banks own all the property, Jefferson would say that the land then is owned by the dead, and the dead cannot own the earth. The earth can only belong to the living. So during this show, you have the living and the dead fighting, because basically you have living people trying to live a real life on the land. They work the land. Throughout this show, you see them working the land. They go hunting, they go fishing, they are searching for stored items that other people have had and then left for one reason or another. They farm and they do all sorts of things. So these are the living people living off the land. But the dead people, they don't live off the land, they live off other living beings. So the zombies walking around, or as they're called, walkers in the show, are the dead, but they're trying to live off the living. So if the dead are the corporations and the people who are in debt and the people who want to force their laws upon us, the younger generation, and force their debt upon us, then you have the dead trying to own the earth. Okay? So this also has to do with trusts. So when a man creates a trust, he can create a trust for his family and future generations. And I don't see anything wrong with that. The problem is that people like Rockefeller has created trusts, and these trusts live on forever. And they're not passed on to really their family members. They're passed on to other people who will continue carrying the trust on, doing the work that they originally wanted done. So the entire medical industry is owned by the medical trust that was started by Rockefeller and his cousin, Frederick Gates. And they were related through Nelson Rockefeller, who was a vice president around turn of the century. So the dead are the corporations and the trusts that live into perpetuity, because trust, if it keeps generating income, which we know that the medical industry generates a lot of income, they never actually die. They can live forever. And nothing living can live forever. So governments shouldn't live forever. Trusts shouldn't live forever. Corporations shouldn't live forever. And in order for them to continue living, they have to take from the earth. They have to take from those people trying to live on the earth who have a right to be here. So once you're born, you have inherited the earth. But these corporations, the people who created them, die and pass away, but their papers are still carried on by some other person. And those trusts and those corporations are considered dead entities because they're not found just in nature. They're not born, they're created by men. Okay, so this is my view of The Walking Dead, and that has to do with sovereign citizen, because a sovereign citizen is someone who doesn't come under the dictates of corporations or the medical industry. They don't, according to someone local to me who's a sovereign citizen, they don't claim to be citizens of the United States. They claim to be citizens of the United States of America. And there is a big difference, because you find the Confederacy, the United States of America, and the dependent states created by the United States, citizens of the United States, and those are supposed to be the people on the federal lands. Okay, so most of you, if you're watching this, you may not understand what I'm saying, but I have a lot of videos out on explaining all of this to you. And if you would like to know more, check out some of my other videos. And if you just wanted to know about The Walking Dead and my view of the Walking Dead's intention, it's to make fantasy, to use fantasy to convey a message. And the message is that they're following the right rabbit into showing you the difference. We have a lot of history also in The Walking Dead, and I'm going to get to a few other things in my next few videos on The Walking Dead and what everything means.